Hi, everybody. Arnold Hamilton, editor of the Oklahoma Observer at our offices in Oklahoma City, along with our longtime contributor in Tulsa, Richard Fricker, getting ready for hopefully a happy new year. Surely 2014 will be a better year than 2013 was. We could spend a lot of time discussing what went wrong in 2013, but perhaps we could start 2014 a little more hopefully. I know, Richard, you've been consulting your crystal ball and your
Yes, yes,
your
yes.
Ouija board and you know your crazy.
Tea leaves, tea
There
leaves.
you go, tea leaves, or coffee grinds, whatever, to see what we think might happen in the august election year of 2014. What oh seer do you see?
Well, uh, I guess the two prominent elections right now, at least in eastern Oklahoma, Tulsa County District Attorney's race, which has three people in it, no incumbent, so it's wide open. One fellow's running as a Tea Party. One fellow's running because he's first assistant district attorney, and then there's a third guy out there that I don't know why he's running. I'm not sure he does either. Then, of course, we've got Governor Fallon, and she, despite all of her best efforts at idiocy, has in fact drawn a primary opponent from the Tea Party, and that's Mr. Bogdan. He ran once before. He got, I think, a third of the vote, 30%, something like that, in the primary, and he
Yeah, closer to
has
40,
very,
actually, I think.
what
I think it was actually closer to 40, maybe.
was it? Uh,
Maybe not.
yeah.
I've
Anyway,
slept since then.
he didn't get the nomination. Bottom line, and but he's going to try to outconserve Mary Fallon, and
Well,
Lisa Reed.
we'll come back to that in a minute because this is an interesting year, I think, for the Tea Party coming up. Let me just say, on the western side of the state, there's a very interesting mayor's race coming up in Oklahoma City between the longtime incumbent Mick Cornett and a progressive city council member by the name of Ed Shadid. And we'll talk about that in a different segment somewhere down the line, perhaps. But we've got that. And the other one on the statewide ballot that I think we ought to be interested in this year, of course, is the superintendent of public instruction because
Right.
Janet Barisi is probably about as radioactive as you can possibly get. But here's the thing. Nationally, the Republicans, and sort of the more mainstream Republicans, and by that I mean the Chamber of Commerce, has decided that Republicans need to be careful not to nominate any more idiots. And
That's going to be difficult.
well, and it could well, particularly in Oklahoma, I think it's going to be difficult. And it makes me wonder as we look into our crystal balls here, whether you think that the all the money that the state chamber might throw at some of these races can really defeat some of these Tea Party types who are getting elected in smaller districts around the state, because they wield a lot of influence at the state legislature, as evidenced by the crackpot legislation we see.
Well, I think the winds, like the great line from Casablanca, I go which way the wind blows, and right now the wind's blowing from Vichy. The wind actually coming across the Oklahoma plains right now may be coming from Utah because of their gay marriage ruling over the past few days.
Mm-hmm.
That it allows gay marriage. It's gone to the 10th Circuit, which is the same circuit that Oklahoma is in.
Mm-hmm.
And the Utah law and the Oklahoma law, while not verbatim, are strikingly similar.
That's right.
So that whatever they rule in Utah will probably hold good for Oklahoma also, which means despite the governor's best efforts and the evangelical Taliban, we may have that law struck down without ever firing a shot and have gay marriage in Oklahoma. It will, of course, depend on what the Supreme Court says ultimately. But if that were to happen, that means that just about everything that the Tea Party, which also translates to ALAC, the American Legislative
Exchange Council.
Exchange.
We call it out. We call it ALEC over on the western side of the state,
ALEC.
Richard. I just want to point that out.
Most of this goofball legislation has been overturned by the courts. Comes out of this group. I mean, these Oklahoma legislators, they don't write it themselves.
Right.
They're buying the package from this lobby group. and
Which
all
is
of its
funded by
members.
the likes of the Koch brothers and other,
Yeah. Uh,
billionaire
yeah,
interests.
the marriage thing that Oklahoma's voted on, that was funded out by a group called the Arlington Group. They're the ones that brought all that into Oklahoma. They wrote it, they promoted it, et cetera, et cetera. So none of it's homegrown. That's my
Mm-hmm.
point. And if the Utah ruling holds and Utah retains its gay marriage statute, in other words, they continue having gay marriage in Utah, and the Oklahoma law is so similar that it gets rendered null and void on its face. There may be some moderate Republican legislators that feel like the Tea Party and evangelicals, that maybe their back's been broken and they don't need to be as fearful of them as they've been in the past, and they may just decide to tell them to shut up and sit down.
Yeah, my prediction is they'll still be afraid of them in the primary. I still think that's a great, and I think the way Mary Fallon has reacted to everything from Medicaid to same-sex partners applying for, guard benefits, suggests that she's worried about that challenge from the right. Even though one would think that Randy Brogdon probably would not have as great an opportunity for even as much success this time around. You get to where you've got to give a reason in the primary to oust an incumbent like Fallon, and
Well,
she seems to have hit all the notes for the most part that those ultra right wingers would be all over.
well, the perpetual candidate gets a little old with the voters of any party,
Mm-hmm.
and he may be running that. That may be the road he's going down. Uh, Part of the other thing that I think is going to happen is T.W. Shannon and his little cadre of whatever ducklings. They're going to try for a court reform. In other words, revamp the district court system, which does not need revamping. But they're mad because all these courts, from district court on up to the Supreme Court, have overturned a lot of the legislation they passed, with the caveat saying you can't do it this way, this log rolling. And nobody said that the legislation was bad. They just said you can't do it this way. And they've even told them, if you'll do it this way, then we'll look at the issue. But
Mm-hmm.
until you do it the right way, but they're going to use that to try to redesign the Oklahoma State court system, which of course will be challenged and it will be overturned and it will waste a lot of taxpayer money. But they want an independent judiciary that votes the way they do.
Exactly. That wants what the state chamber wants.
Yeah.
And of course, we've been down this road in Oklahoma before, but clearly Mr. Shannon and others didn't learn the lessons of history about why we have the system that we have today because of the corruption and the indictments that we had in the past. And I would just recommend, let me hold this up for a second here.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful book out by a guy named Lawrence Leamer. It's called The Price of Justice, a true story of greed and corruption. And this is a tale that is analogous to Oklahoma. It's set in West Virginia where a coal baron decided basically to buy the state Supreme Court over there. And that's the kind of malarkey we put up with here in Oklahoma before we developed the system that we have now, which has served us well for nigh on a half century now. But
Mm-hmm.
it isn't pleasing to the powers that be right now because they just don't roll over and give them whatever they want. And this is bad public policy in the making. People in Oklahoma need to wake up and pay attention to what's going on here.
Well, the more they complain about the Oklahoma educational system, and the more I look at the legislature, I think they may be right, because these legislators seem to be completely incapable of learning anything, even when it's presented to them in black and white numerous times. It's that whole insanity thing attributed to Einstein, doing the same thing over each time and expecting a different result. And it hasn't happened. And blaming the courts is not going to do it.
And one of the same things that we seem to be doing more and more these days is electing these people from the ideological fringe to public office. And you can see where that's getting Oklahoma. Isn't it interesting that Oklahoma, which seemed to have everything going for it in terms of being selected as one of the 6 drone test sites in the United States, got passed over. And it, to me, that bespeaks the lack of clout in our congressional delegation in Washington because it is dominated by the Tea Party extremists.
Yeah, well, Jim Bridenstine, Mark Wayne Miller, they vote against the leaders. They vote against Tom Cole, the leadership. Bridenstine, just a bobblehead standing there going Obama, Obama, Obama. And these 2 clowns have accomplished absolutely nothing. I don't know if anyone's going to challenge either one of them, but they're certainly ripe for the picking if somebody comes through with a program rather than just a bunch of ideology. They would be very ripe for the picking, and I don't think the Tea Party will come to their rescue. I don't think they will.
Well, something else too that I've been thinking about, and I'm not going to be bold enough to predict that it will necessarily happen in 2014, but I think it will eventually happen. I think that some court somewhere, an ultimate court, will conclude that the 10 Commandments monument on the state capitol lawn needs to be removed. And that's going to put an end to all the others who want to get their monuments placed, everything from the Hindu group that would like to place a monument there, atheist groups, a satanic group out of New York. This has thrown the door open to all the kind of craziness that we thought that it would when they put it there and claimed it was not a religious symbol, but instead was a historical document, which of course it's not.
I want an oak tree for Celtic Heritage Week. I want a large oak tree with great big acorns.
So, do you predict we'll get one planted before the year's out?
Probably not. I'm guessing we won't. What I do think when we look at, as I said, the Tulsa District Attorney's race and Governor Fallon, these people are going to try to out-conserve each other. On the prosecution side, don't be surprised to hear somebody rallying to the idea of the death penalty for overtime parking. On the state level, we're going to ship unwed mothers to some undisclosed location and get them off the welfare rolls. And every teacher is going to have a time clock and a monitor. I don't, it's going to be silly. That's why they call it the silly season.
Well, let's assume that Fallon does survive the primary, which I think most people assume she will. Does she pivot back more toward the middle? I've got to think that she's hearing from rural hospitals on Medicaid. She's hearing from people across the state about how unfair it is that these Guard personnel and their loved ones can't apply for benefits. The sorts of things that as you get into the broader electorate, it seems to me she'd have a harder time campaigning on.
She had that goofball mouthpiece that made the comment about the prison system, working mandatory overtime 12, Now, she's going to want to go to private prisons, but when you look at the private prisons, all of them are knee-deep in lawsuits, and very quickly, they settled the lawsuit because they don't want a judge making a ruling. Mm-hmm. If you can get past summary judgment, then they'll settle with you because they do not want to go to trial and get exposed to all that. And that's how they're keeping their skirts moderately clean. Will Fallon pivot? I don't know. She may be more of a true believer than I think she is. However, her veracity is certainly not something I would take to the bank. She's kind of like the guy running for DA, that promised Connie Johnson the marijuana hearing and then they didn't do it. You don't want to let him, if you're getting a firefight, he's not the guy you want to send back for ammunition. Fallon, I don't know. She may be more ideologically prone than we think she is, and she may stay the course, and then we'll have a real mess to clean up in another 4 years. Well, or she may read the tea leaves and decide to swing a little more moderate because the legislature may have emboldened itself and not be willing to give her what she wants.
Well, I think one thing is certain. As we've discussed all these topics and made some predictions about how we think 2014 is going to unfold, it has the potential to be wackier and crazier than 2013, it looks like to me.
We've still got a lot of registration time. and there's a lot of time for incumbents to do something really foolish that would turn the tables on them. The legislature's next, coming session, these guys are going to have to be very careful not to make, particularly more stupid remarks that might reflect badly back home. Bridenstine and Mueller, they're going to have to take a good look, because that's a pretty cushy job, and if you're a first termer, you're a lot more vulnerable than you are any other time. And neither one of these guys have accomplished much except be hod carriers for the Tea Party, and that may not be a very enviable place to be. So if they draw a primary candidate, or if they draw a Democrat that can just do the shoe leather and get out to the people, and maybe the Republicans just aren't interested in saving them.
Yeah, that could be. Well, listen, it's. I hope you have a wonderful New Year, and we will catch up around the corner, and there's going to be lots to talk about in 2014, that's for sure.
See you next year.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.